Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Coming up a little bit later in this show, we'll pay tribute to late Fargo-Moorhead painter Tim Ray. But first, joining us now is the longtime editorial page editor of the Forum newspaper, and you also contribute to Prairie Public's Main Street radio program, Jack Zaleski. Jack, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's nice to be with you, John.
As we get started, as we always do, tell the folks a little bit about yourself, your background.
Well, I've been in Fargo working for the Forum for, it's going to be 30 years soon, about 28 years. Prior to that, I was the editor and general manager at the Devils Lake Daily Journal, which is, up in the northeast part of the state, and that beautiful part of the state, that beautiful lake up there. We love that. Get up there a lot. And before that, I was, growing up and getting educated in New Britain, Connecticut, in New England. And so it was a change to come out here, but education in New Britain, which is a blue-collar industrial town, different from what we see here in North Dakota. I went to the University of Connecticut and got what education I could get there, and took a year off from the university to join the VISTA program. I don't know if your viewers remember the old VISTA program, but it was a domestic Peace Corps is what it was, and you took you made a 13-month or so commitment. And so I ended up going through a training program, taking that year off. We were all going to save the world. This was in the 1960s. It's quite obvious we weren't successful at that, but I went through a training program in Denver and in southern Colorado, and I got assigned with 3 other VISTA volunteers to the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa tribe in northern North Dakota, up along the Canadian border. Thought it was the end of the world. It is, and I met the woman who was to become my wife. She was a student at the University of Connecticut doing an internship with the Bureau of Indian Affairs up there, and we got acquainted, as they say. I went back to school, and we kept in contact. One thing led to another. We discussed about decisions about whether she would come to Connecticut, and we'd begin life there, or I would come to North Dakota, and we would begin our lives together here. Turned out I came out to visit, stayed, went to work for the Devils Lake paper, accidentally. She was at the School for the Deaf at the time as a counselor, having graduated from UND. And we were married a year or so later, settled in Devils Lake, began to raise a family, and that was what, 45 years ago.
Well, so there you go. I was going to ask you, so you accidentally got into the newspaper business.
Sure.
So what kept you in it?
Sure. Well, my father and my uncle were linotype operators in the old hot metal days at the Hartford Times and the New Britain Herald, my hometown newspaper. So I was always around newspapers. I worked for my college and high school newspapers. And so when I decided to come out here, just temporarily, I knew I could do that because I'd been working for the University of Connecticut's Office of Public Information as a work-study thing. And so I know I could do that. So I got this temporary job for $84 a week at the Devils Lake Daily Journal because I'd been in pre-med. I'd been in the sciences and that sort of stuff at UConn. Anyway, so it was serendipitous. It was sort of accidental. And I stayed there. For almost 20 years we lived at Devils Lake, and one thing led to another, and I had a nice offer to come down from Bill Marcil, a former publisher of the paper, to go to work for him as the editorial page editor, and it has turned out to be, as many people in my business will tell you, the best job in North Dakota and northwestern Minnesota newspapering. It just is. It's been great. The Forum is a strong, very strong regional newspaper, good management. Serious about the news, serious about the editorial function of the newspaper, and I've been privileged to manage that page for the ownership of the Forum.
Okay. So, with that said, talk about what you do as the Forum, at the Forum, and overseeing that editorial page. You've been doing it a long time now.
I'll tell you, John, sometimes I just sit back and I think, these people are paying me pretty good money to write opinions. That's a pretty good gig, So, but I get started early. I come in really early before the phones start ringing and begin to plan the next day's page, the editorial, do a lot of course, listening to the news as I come in the morning with coffee, and reading a couple of newspapers, some online, some in print. Read several newspapers a day, and look for a local or regional issue first. That will have some import for our readers, some impact for our readers, and then begin to develop an editorial, and I'll work on that throughout the day. Sometimes I have an editorial board meeting. I have a very good editorial board of several good thinkers, and we get together, meet with people, meet with college presidents or elected officials, whoever wants to come in and visit with us. We have an open door about that. And I'll sometimes talk with my cartoonists. I happen to be blessed to have two local cartoonists who are as good as any you'll see in the nation, Steve Stark and Trygve Olsen. And these people are highly talented cartoonists, so I'll talk with them to see what they're working on. And maybe I often don't give them guidance because they're just so good. They know how to synthesize an issue into a good picture. Pick out the syndicated columnists we're going to use, go through the letters. We get a lot of letters, and I'll go through the letters in the morning and determine which ones we're going to put in the pipeline for publication. When things are really busy during a heavy political season, or when there's some issue that's really stirred people up, it's not uncommon to get for me to go through 50, 60 letters a day. It slows down sometime, and so I'll have to go through and do triage, I guess, and determine which ones are going to make the cut. And sometimes the people who don't make the cut object to that, but that's our call. And some letters are so outrageous they're not going to be considered at all. But one of the things I really enjoy is that the number of letters we get and the phone calls I get, emails, all of it I get, indicate a really engaged population out there in this part of the world. Educated, serious about issues, willing to mix it up, willing to send a letter that they anticipate will be published over their name. That's a courageous act for some people. So I love to see that churn among our readership because it suggests to me that they're not only engaged in their communities, but they're reading the newspaper in the various forms that we publish.
Well, Jack, you say that because you say you obviously make the decision, and I'm sure there are some that are extreme that probably are not suitable.
Of course.
Would be one of it, and some are similar. So how do you get down to really deciding which one makes it?
Well, when you that's right. The similarity question is a good one because when there's something really going on that stirs people up, it's like a blizzard, and so I'll get maybe, let's say I get let's just knock it down. Let's say I get 20 letters on the same topic, and most of them will take the same approach and say the same thing. So I'll make a selection of 2 or 3 or 4 from that 20, and use those as representative of the bunch. Now, that's the way we can do it because of space limitations and trying to be as fair as we can. The people who don't get their letter published get a little irritated, and sometimes I'll hear from them. But most people understand that not every letter is going to be published. It's just it's not physically possible because of space limitations, and some of them don't meet the requirements. They don't give full name. They don't give contacts. They don't give all the information we need to check a letter to make sure a letter is valid. So there's all that busy work, that's part of it.
All right. Well, those are the letters, and you mentioned your columns. You were talking about those, and a little bit about how you come up with some of them. But do you have multiple columns in the work, or are you working on just sort of what's today and what's local and regional now, or do you have some for 6 months from now?
Oh no. For the daily editorial that's on that upper left-hand corner of the page, we'll try to make that as current as we can, and that's not necessarily me. I have the responsibility, the order, to manage the page, write the editorial. The editorial represents, as we say in a little disclaimer at the bottom of the editorial every day, represents the consensus opinion of the management of the newspaper and the Forum Editorial Board. And I say consensus because there's not always agreement. And so it's my job, even if I don't agree with, say, a political endorsement editorial, it's my job to write it. Sometimes I have to grit my teeth and write it, but that's the hat I wear. I manage the page for the ownership of the newspaper. I'm directly answerable to the publisher, not to any of the other editors, not to any of the other sub-editors in the building or in the newsroom. I answer directly to the publisher. I work every day with the top news editors. I go to the news huddle in the morning where the ideas percolate for the editorial.
Now, are there a couple of columns that you could mention that you're particularly proud of? Or?
Well, my personal column that I write on Sunday is kind of the frosting on the cake, the gravy on the potatoes, or however you want to put it. I look forward to writing that every day because I have all sorts of latitude, all sorts of wiggle room to write whatever I want. That's under my name with the little mug shot and all that stuff. So I really enjoy doing that column every week, and I do that toward the end of the week for Sunday publication. And that one is often a surprise. Sometimes I think I'll write something in that column that will stir some sort of a reaction, and it doesn't. Sometimes I'll write something that I think is just going to be ignored, and it becomes a flashpoint for something or other. It's interesting that when I write about family issues, grandchildren or aging or whatever it happens to be, those columns that are more personal than issue columns seem to resonate more among the readers, and I'm kind of gratified by some of that, and so it's really a treat to write that kind of a column and then to get the reaction from readers. So I enjoy those. And certain editorials, we think that sometimes an editorial doesn't have an impact. Well, they do. And we've traced over the years that especially local editorials, issue editorials or political endorsement editorials for city commission or school board, for example, they can have an impact on an election or on the way an issue is handled in a public body. So that's a heady responsibility, a serious responsibility that we take because we know that institutional voice of the forum can have some impact. And over the years, going back and looking at the editorials and looking at the way issues played out, we can measure that.
Okay. Well, let's talk about politics for just a moment.
Sure.
As we record this right now, of course, the governor's race, there's no candidates at this, announced candidates at this time. But what do you see maybe happening, or how that race may play out a little bit?
Well, as you say, this, we're recording this a few weeks before it airs, and at this point, you're right, there are no candidates on either side. There are potential candidates, people who have expressed interest, and again, by the time your viewers see this, one or two or three of them, particularly on the Republican side, will have announced that they're going to seek their party's endorsement. On the Democratic side, there are some people who are interested at this point, but given what has been described as the Democratic bench, it's pretty slim pickings for the Democrats. I mean, there'll be a candidate. There will be a candidate to challenge for an open seat for governor, which hasn't happened in a long time. But at this point, on the Democratic side, who that might be, I really I don't have a clue. Don't have a clue.
Well, let's go to something that maybe. What about the frenzy in the over the oil boom seems to be waning a bit. Yeah. How do you see maybe that playing out in the next few years?
Mm-hmm. I think the best phrase I've seen come out of the oil patch since oil prices collapsed from $100 at this time last year to under 50 over the last few weeks. The best phrase I've seen has come out of the Williston Economic Development people, and they've called it a new normal. And so, which given what was going on out there up until the collapse of prices, oil prices, their new normal is giving cities like Williston, Watford City, to some extent Dickinson, Stanley, the others out there, time to catch up with infrastructure, time to adjust better to the law enforcement needs that have been neglected because of the pressures of the oil patch. There's going to be some dislocation. There's going to be some economic hurt out there, especially among hotel and motel people, restaurant people who might have overbuilt, and they're seeing occupancy rates in hotels at historically at very, very low levels that are way lower than the national average for occupancy rates. So that's going to hurt. But the upside of this is that the numbers we see is that pumping is still going on at approximately 1.3 million. That hasn't gone down much. Of course, the price per barrel is down. We're also seeing some slow down, not slow down, but some reduction in the number of oil trains because they're using more pipeline capacity. And you know, that's a good thing for oil traffic on the rails. But I think this new normal that Williston is embracing, it sounds like, is the smart way to go. Rather than wringing their hands and gnashing their teeth that everything is going to hell, it's not. I think what they're finding out is that they can adjust to this in a way that's smart, that's economically smart, that's socially smart, because they're still moving ahead with major projects that were on the books. They might be a little slower, they might be modified a little bit, but they're still, rebuilding and restoring and expanding the infrastructure and the other services they need out there to accommodate what will be, over the long term, what will be a strong oil economy. I mean, that's not going to go away in this price decline. So.
You know, what do you think of the New York Times expose on the Bakken, which was not terribly flattering to Governor Dalrymple and some other officials?
Well, it was a good piece of reporting. It was several parts. So I read it. An awful lot of what they reported had been reported before in the North Dakota press and in the regional press. What the Times articles did, the Times series did, is they brought it all together in a way that was sometimes unflattering and sometimes really a good report on exactly what was happening. And I think that the if you want to call it a slant, but what you could take away from the way the Times reported that was that North Dakota, in particular Governor Dalrymple and his administration, are too friendly to the industry. Well, that rap has been out there for a long time. What people who come in from the outside forget, and I'm not making a value judgment on this, but what they forget is that North Dakota has, in its policy-making role, legislature, regulatory agencies, the administrative agencies, like the governor's agencies in his office, have pretty much made a decision that the culture of the state will be welcoming to the oil industry and the associated industries that come along with oil.
We're starting to run out of time here, but sure. Going back to your column, do you ever have a difficulty coming up with a column, or are there just enough issues out there to take care of that? Well,
it's a deadline pressure is a real thing, and so when you get to deadline pressure, you get like you get to a Friday and you're working on weekend pages, and you have to get things done ahead. The deadline pressure is a real, there's discipline there. And so you find a way. But yeah, there's some days where, God, what am I going to write today? But yeah, I got to fill that space. So we do. So.
How many more years do you see yourself doing this?
Well, I'm at the age now, both my wife and I are at the age now where we can walk away from what we're doing anytime. But a newsroom is a special place. A newspaper newsroom is a special place. The newsroom at the Forum is just populated by really interesting people, really good people. And I like working with them. I like coming there every day. When the time comes when I don't want to be there, when it's a chore to walk up the stairs every day, then I'll walk away. But right now, it's a good place to be.
Well, Jack, we are out of time, and thank you. And if people want more information, obviously, where can they go? And the Forum's going to be the place, isn't it?
That's the place. That's the place.
Jack, thanks so much for joining us today.
Nice to be here, John.
Stay tuned for more. Tim Ray touched many lives over the years as a professor at Minnesota State University Moorhead. He's most remembered for the critiques and guidance he provided students. His own work included a mixture of abstract printmaking, papermaking, and painting. Ray lost his battle to cancer in February 2013, but his art remains a memory of dedicated passion.
There came a point where you could see the acceleration of his illness, but I think that he was the last person that would tell himself to stop, because this was something that he had done his entire life, and the process was really part of his nature. It was like eating a meal. He would be in the studio. He has a very particular personality. He was kind of ironic and witty. He was, I think, counted on for being being honest with people. He was always really involved in the local art scene and the regional art scene, both through the Plains Art Museum and the Rourke Art Museum. What Tim was most known for was his acrylic collages. He didn't limit himself, and that was one thing that was really interesting about his work, is that he was able to not be confined by his style. He was able to explore, in some ways, this geometric feeling with this emotional tie to his past.
Well, I always say that I can't remember, not drawing and painting. When it came time to go to university, I couldn't imagine succeeding at anything except art. And that got me really into the teaching field more than anything else.
He was a teacher, so he taught basic design and color and all that sort of thing. But people said that one of the things that they remember is the critiques in how they would not only do their painting, but they would have group critiques and individual critiques. He made sure that they had outside influence as well. So he would take groups to Minneapolis or other places, make sure that students got to the various shows at the galleries and museums here. If he was in town where he knew a former student was at, he would make sure that he got in touch with them, and they would go talk about art and go to museums and shows. He was, a very friendly guy, but at the same time, he had things to do. When people walked in the door, if he wasn't expecting them and if he was involved in painting, he would be pretty brusque. But if he ever had his apron on, we knew he was at work. He actually got involved in a show at the Rourke. They had his work on the walls, and then for a couple weeks, he was working in residence there, painting.
I did it, and then that was followed by maybe half a dozen other artists. I think all those exhibitions were really interesting. I'm very proud of the fact that I was the person who said to Jim, you should really go back to the idea of artists working.
It was actually called Artist at Work. And he didn't really like demonstrating because he never really got work done, but he kind of figured it out after a while, because people wanted to see him at work. And so he did, figure that out finally. But it took him, 50-some years.
You expect good technique. You expect neatness and orderliness in anything. Abstract art is an offense against neatness. The thing about technique is everybody thinks that what the technique is trying to match the marks on the canvas to something out in reality. Like, did you try to make this look like a duck or a naked lady or a still life? The abstract artists can say, I'm really not trying to do that. People who do that are a little stupid anyway, aren't they? Because you can take a picture of that. If you can get that kind of reality, you better come up with a better idea.
What's interesting about his work is that it's not immediately recognizable what it is. People, even if they don't know his history, when they look at his work, for example, this piece near Hecla, they have a feeling that it's a harbor, or just because of the color itself, they have a feeling of the ocean. It's almost like an artificial feeling to it from the eye, but then you have the forms make this almost kite-like reference. And I think that theme has been kind of played with throughout his work.
It's just, me and the materials and Lady Luck. That's all there is to it. Actually, I never said that before. I think that's a good line, don't you? I'm going to use that again.
Later in his career, things became more difficult for him. We wanted to help him through this time, but also celebrate his life simultaneously. So there were many mixes of emotions. With the retrospective too, the retrospective, which we combined with the North Dakota Museum of Art, the sense of urgency was there, and unfortunately with this illness, it accelerated at a pace that was hard for Tim to keep up with.
The last 2 weeks of his life, he was really failing. So people just stepped in and did it. It's really pretty sweet.
We had been working so hard to produce this retrospective, and it was Tim's intention to be there for that.
He died February 9th, and then the show opened the 17th.
We had people coming from all over the country not everyone made the opening, but throughout that month we had former students and former colleagues or whatever it was that I don't know if Tim even realized that he had touched them in a way that he did, and his style had such an effect on what they produced or how they lived.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Pulse for this week, and as always, thanks for watching.
Funding for Minnesota Legacy programs are provided by a grant from the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008, and by the members of Prairie Public.